Thank you.
Okay, guys, this is my dear friend, Louise Arnold Friend.
We didn't make that.
And she's going to present her brand new program on War on the Home Front, World War I in Gettysburg, because a lot of people don't realize the impact that World War I had on Gettysburg. And Gettysburg impacted World War I a little bit. So it's going to be so it should be good. So, and she's very nervous. So let's make her feel
Nobody
welcome.
can be worse than me.
We are
It's good to see all you friendly faces out there, and I hope at the end of the program you'll still be friendly. If not, well, you know, they're hard to boys. No, seriously. Initial apologies if this program is a little funky. I've never put together a PowerPoint before. Yes, that does explain the Facebook post of last night.
Yes.
When 10 minutes after getting the last slide in and labeled, the system did something that completely rearranged my formatting on every slide and changed the color of my text. Hope y'all like gray and orange. That works. This is a very bad copy of a very good piece of art by the famous American artist John Singer Sargent, called Gas. And when you look at it in Bosch and I were just talking about this when he came in first, when you first look at this painting in a book or see it in a slideshow, you don't have an image of its size until you see it right there in front of you. And it is the size of this wall.
Wow.
It is a very impactful and detailed look at basic components of combat in the Great War. This war had been ongoing since August of 1914. And I did a little bit of study, mostly via local newspapers, of what this community was seeing, doing in reaction to the verbal and visual images they were getting primarily from the European front of war. That's a mine crater. That is actually the famous Hawthorne mine crater with what looks to be about 40 individuals scattered throughout. That's the photo's cropped. The thing is huge and 52 meters deep. And the trenches, the ever-present trenches, running from the Swiss Alps to the North Sea on a very irregular, jagged line up through northern Europe. And this is a staged image. This is not real combat. But it's still very telling as to what the troops were enduring out on the ground. People were reading verbiage describing these engagements, describing the god-awful living conditions in the trenches of Europe, and probably thanking God that they weren't there. Additionally, the American home front was impacted periodically during those 3+ years of non-American involvement by cases of espionage. Probably the most visible one in Black Tom, New Jersey, where, oh, that's right, you told me it didn't work on the screen. A and for numbers, I'm a historian, I don't do numbers, so forgive me. At Blacktown, New Jersey, there were 1,000 tons of small arms, ammunition, and TNT on barges and ocean-going vessels waiting to be shipped across. Even though we were not at war, that doesn't mean our manufacturers weren't making money on the war. And it blew up. Breaking windows as far away as Times Square in New York. And the nation was pretty rocked by that, with a $20 million, in today's money, $445 million loss of material. This was a time period in our history which probably saw the most rigid freedom of speech restrictions in our history. When the president declared neutrality, it meant neutrality. Evidently that didn't apply to the arms manufacturers, but, sorry. Speaking against or for any of the warring nations could very well land you in the Huskow, and many people did end up imprisoned for a time because of their public statements. Oh, and it's not all displaying. Oh well. Overseeing a nation which was very diverse, both economically and ethnically, was Woodrow Wilson. He entered in his second term, being re-elected in 1916. On his platform, he kept us out of war. Not quite a half a year later, he asked for a declaration of war on Germany, which occurred on April 6th. And this morning, today, America officially inaugurated and kicked off its centennial events commemorating its experiences in World War I at the Liberty Memorial out in Kansas City. The final straw for American lawmakers, and indeed for President Wilson, who really, really, really was trying to keep us out of the European catastrophe. The Zimmerman telegram. British intelligence operatives intercepted the transmission of a telegram from the German foreign minister to the government of Mexico, offering a portion of the spoils of war if they would keep the Mexican border in turmoil, forcing American arms to remain engaged there and divert it away from the crisis in Europe. There were a lot of people hacked off about that, to include President Wilson. That, in conjunction with Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare policies, he finally realized that America was no longer going to be immune from the Great War. And almost immediately, throughout this country, young men began to enlist. This was the first, and I use total war in every sense of the word, that our nation had seen in half a century, the last, of course, being the American Civil War. The entire populace was in one way or another affected by our entry into this war. There are two basic functions I'm going to be concentrating on in how Gettysburg and this county at large was affected by our involvement in the Great War. Personnel and production of war material. On the personnel side, Adams County at large, I can't really give too many detailed specifics on some subjects about Gettysburg versus the county, because all war activity administration was done at the county level. 6,376 Adams County men were registered by the draft in its 4 various categories. That's a lot of people for a rural county. Of those 6,376, only 2 show up in the reports as malingerers. The rest accepted their fate. Now, of those who were eligible to be drafted, which is, I interpret that number as the male manpower available in the county, 1,086 persons served in uniform. This includes 7 female nurses. I'm sorry, 5 female nurses were in uniform. No, 7 were in uniform and 5 were civilian volunteers, so there are a total of 12 nurses. Anyway, we go from 6,400 available personnel to a few over 1,000 actually being inducted. And you see 2 of these young men. Again, screen is not displaying the whole name. I'm sorry about that. I'm just going to go through the vital stats on these young men. Earl Myers was from McSherrystown. He was 19 years old. Enlisted in July of 17, so that's just 2 months after the war declaration. 3 months. He died January 1st, 1918, while training at Camp Green, North Carolina. George Naylor, 22, was from Biglerville, just up the road. He died of influenza and pneumonia at Camp Lee, Virginia in October of 1918. Francis Ryder was from East Berlin, over near the York County line. He had previous service with Pennsylvania Guard troops on the Mexican border. He enlisted again, and he died July 15th, 1918, at the 2nd Marne. And this is his gravesite in Roman Military Cemetery. Albert Bell, here's an interesting character. What do you notice about that picture? Yeah, he's a chaplain. He does not fit the norm of the rest of the county soldiers. He was actually an Iowan. He attended the seminary, graduating in 1911, and apparently married a local girl. So when he enlisted, he was counted on Adams County. Gas exposure led to pneumonia, and he died during the Meuse-Argonne campaign in 1918. And now finally, a name you're probably familiar with. Isn't he a handsome boy? Mm-hmm. Albert Lentz. Locals know he is the soldier for whom our National American Legion post is named. Albert Lentz was 26. He was from Gettysburg. He too had served on the Mexican border in Pennsylvania National Guard units. He re-enlisted in the regular army that autumn. He was deployed to France with his command, the 18th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division. He died in the spring of 1918, on the 20th of April at Cantigny, or as you probably have heard it pronounced normally here in this country, Cantigny. Honest, this didn't happen here. But I want to talk a little bit about war production. War production was a vital part of our war effort before we even entered the war. Munitions supply, manufacture, and so forth. Federal coordination with private industry. Some people call that the military-industrial complex. Federal coordination with private industry became necessary to supply bare minimum. And what you're looking at here on this screen is the power plant, the largest power plant in the world, it says, at Old Hickory Proving Ground in Tennessee. This was one of 5 proving grounds that the government contracted with the DuPont Corporation to, from the ground up, build. DuPont at this site alone spent spent $87 million to transform an isolated site out in the boondocks of West Tennessee into a thriving community, a town. It had paved streets, it had theaters, it had churches, post office, schools for the children. Why would they have a school? Because they imported workers to include single women, Black Puerto Ricans, Hispanic Puerto Ricans, Black Americans, and Mexicans who lived in segregated housing, also built by DuPont, and the single ladies had a matron overseeing them, so they did not get out of line with social norms. And rec facilities, they were also built but segregated. Production here commenced on the 2nd of July, 1918. Sounds like an awfully long ways from April 1917 when we entered the war. But think about that. They built a city that housed 30,000 workers and 4,000 buildings. Their primary production was gun cotton, explosives. Hence the need for an isolated site, no doubt. Women workers, and you'll notice there are Black faces, evident Hispanic faces throughout this. They were hired not only to do clerical work, but also worked in the production line. This particular group worked in a box plant, making the boxes for the gun cotton, which was going to be shipped overseas. Now, this did happen here. I guess the gray background and orange lettering that I didn't ask PowerPoint for isn't quite so bad now, is it? Okay.
Stands right here.
We didn't get the power plant.
Neither did Upton. Neither did Camp Upton.
No.
It's now Brookhaven National Laboratory, where I work. So.
Okay, cool. That's cool. But a lot of Adams Countyans did travel to Baltimore and Philadelphia to work in the war industry. We got instead Camp Colt. Everybody knows Camp Colt, right? Or at least you've heard of it. No? Yes? No? Okay. Camp Colt was a training center. Early in the war, I mean, we declare war, what, April 6th? 6 weeks later, the Army advises the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission that this site has been selected for a training ground in the Army's Eastern Department. This is not without precedent. In the Spanish-American War, Chickamauga-Chattanooga National Military Park served as a training camp and staging area for troops bound for Cuba and other sites. It was almost 11, I don't know how many months between May and March of the next year, but whatever. I'm counting 10 months. Later, personnel began to arrive, so it wasn't a quick thing. No, I don't do math. And shortly after the first troops began arriving, a very disappointed, on your far left, Dwight David Eisenhower was assigned command of Camp Colt. Why was he disappointed?
He wanted to fight.
Absolutely.
That's what you're trained to do.
He's a trained soldier. He wants to be on the front. But something in his background, his early career, had tagged him at the War Department as an excellent planner and trainer. And he got the job. Again, I apologize for the quality of these images. They looked pretty good on my screen, and they look pretty good on that screen too. One of these, the guy with the cane, is British. So there were British and in I think a later photograph. Yeah, I have a French and something else in white, and that's not American Navy. That's Japanese? Okay, I'll take your word for it. But over the next 17 months, as you can see, 15,000 troops passed through the series of coursework set up by Eisenhower and his staff. And his staff included some very capable young officers of the time period. Two that come to my mind, that means that's the two of them that I know, were Truman Smith, who later, during the pivotal 1930s, was the American military attaché at our embassy in Berlin. And Edward Almond, Ned Almond, who commanded a division in World War II and later a corps during the Korean War. $15,000 men and 2 FT-17s to train them on.
Those tanks were very busy.
You ever see one of these things, an FT-17?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there are two guys out in, is it Montana or Idaho? Western Montana, who have an operable one. And somewhere out there in the greater world, there is a video of these guys actually running their Renault tank. There is a Renault over at the museum in Carlisle, but it's been up-armored to meet early 1930s spec, so it's not really a World War I era anymore, but they're not very big. And he's got to train a bunch of farm kids, basically, to use these in combat. I think that's a neat
That's
image.
great.
Is that not a great image? You know, I'm going to turn this around. So,
Is that one of the towers?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Ziegler's
one that
Grove
was
Tower.
in the Bryan farm.
Oh, okay.
Or Ziegler's, I'm sorry,
Ziegler's
Ziegler's Grove.
Grove, okay.
The Ziegler's Grove Tower.
I love these.
All this swirl is now happening in what had been a relatively quiet and docile place. Gettysburg had seen its share over the years of upheaval. We had this battle thing. And then in 1888 and in 1913, we had these thousands of persons gathering for Veterans Reunion. So they've seen crowds. But not too many of those events included the amount of traffic that came into this community. Vehicular traffic, not only not motor cars, but trucks, and then the two little tanks also were coming in. This is a lot of words on one screen. How many of you have lived through death by PowerPoint presentations? Oh, God, yes. I apologize for this, but I thought the information was important enough to see. We're now moving away from the training aspect to overall governance in this swirl. Every aspect of life in American communities was dominated by the war effort. Everybody have a chance to see that?
No. You have two names up there. Were they synonymous for each other, or is one a subset of the other?
No, actually they're synonymous. The Council of National Defense, established by the state of Pennsylvania, and then other states did the same thing, eventually became the Council of National Defense and Committee of Public Safety. Bye. Okay. Under the Council of National Defense, Committee of Public Safety, were these activities in each county. And for each one of those subcommittees, there was a chairperson, a vice chairperson, and a secretary. You notice that there's a combination of service-oriented functions as well as restrictive functions or controlling functions and training functions. I want to hone in on two of them. Wow. Going through my notes faster than I thought I was. The first one is at the top of the right-hand column.
I was hoping you were going to look at
Yes.
that one.
Is that the next one, no?
I had to do that. I absolutely had to do that.
That's not fun.
The 4-Minute Men were authorized by President Woodrow Wilson. They were civilian volunteers who would give 4-minute speeches. Boring, isn't it now? 4-minute speeches on topics provided by the Committee of Public Information. This was a government agency, independent of everything. It answered directly to President Wilson. It was headed by a guy named George Creel, who is a real interesting piece of work in a number of ways. The 4-Minute Men was a division under the Committee of Public Information. It was a way for President Wilson to communicate with what was a real fragmented population. He didn't have CNN 24/7. Newspapers were not always the best way to go when trying to convince people of something. So the 4-Minute Men were put out there with prepared speeches. The local director, the county director, had to be approved by Washington, and they in turn, it was the local director's responsibility to choose speakers to utilize theaters and other public venues in their community to gather a crowd and give talks on such things as the 4th of July message from the president. How about that? He took the time to put together, or George Creel did it for him, put together a message, all for us. How are we going to go about organizing this war? Where are we going to get the people? And of course, how important would the Liberty Loan be? There were some I don't know who the 4-Minute Men were here. I know that their director was C.J. Staley. That's about all I can help with, because I haven't researched it that deeply. I know they spoke at the Majestic Theater. Sometimes inside, sometimes on a platform, a stump out on the front. The speakers are unknown to me, but some very famous 4-Minute Men were Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Charlie Chaplin, and they apparently had 4-Minute Women too, because Mary Pickford was out on the stump talking as well. Obviously, those were all in California. This was a method of propaganda. Were they telling lies? No. But they were trying to keep the people connected with the war effort.